this episode of MythBusters.
Wow! Oh, the current is really strong.
It's Bubble, Toil and Trouble.
Whoa! It's like riding a fucking bronco.
As the guys test the busy fable that it's impossible to stay afloat in bubbly water.
You're just not trying hard enough. That's more like it. Yeah, baby.
But will it be a case of sink or swim?
Swim harder.
Meantime, Gary, Tori, and Grant take aim at a myth that's got them quivering with anticipation.
Okay, it's lit.
Can an exploding arrow cleave a mighty pine tree in two? With precision explosives and the mother of all pine trees, it's time to split.
I'm so ready. Here we go. 3, 2, 1.
Who are the MythBusters? Adam Savage.
That's the spirit, soldiers!
And Jamie Heineman.
I'll be darned.
Between them more than 30 years of special effects experience. Joining them, Carrie Byron.
That is messed up!
Grant Imahara.
Start the car!
And Tori Belleci.
Let's chop this car up!
They don't just tell the myths, they put them to the test.
Hangover?
No, I'm setting up a demo for our next story.
Which is?
Well, there's a myth going around that it is impossible to swim in bubbly water, whether it's in acid tablets or carbonated. As long as there's bubbles in the water, you won't be able to swim.
Really?
Yeah, the conventional wisdom is that the bubbles make the water overall less dense, and so while you'd float in non-bubbly water, when you get to the bubble part, you'd sink like a stone.
Sounds like we're going for a swim.
I think so.
According to the myth, when water is filled with fish, you supposedly sink without trace. But does the density difference of bubbly water really mean that swimming in it is impossible?
Well, since we used up all our antacid breaking out of jail, let's say we start with something small like a fish tank and make a bunch of bubbles in it and see what happens.
Sounds good. Let's do it. So the myth is that it is impossible to swim in bubbly water because the aerated water is supposed to be less dense than regular water. Are you ready for some experimenting? I don't think so. So I'm about to conduct some scale experiments to see if there is a change in density of water when I run a crap load of bubbles through it. All right, let's try that again.
It's a great place to start. Adam and his 2D mini-me will test the science at the heart of this myth. Do bubbles make a difference to the density of water?
What I've made here is a crude hydrometer. It's actually floating at a very specific depth, depending on the density of the water. If I increase the density of this fish tank with, say, salt, he would float a little higher. If I decrease the density with, let's say, air bubbles, he'd float a little lower. Now, if this myth is true and I put a whole bunch of air bubbles underneath this guy, little Adam there is going to drown.
So now that 2D mini-me is neutrally buoyant, it's time to see if he'll sink like the myth suggests.
3, 2, 1.
Someone's happy, but aside from putting a smile on Adam's dial, what are the results?
I'm seeing almost no change at all in the hydrometer's level. If anything, it's actually rising a little bit. And I must admit, I had a little bias going into this. I thought that as soon as I turned on the bubbles, that hydrometer was gonna whoop, drop below the surface. I'm fully in the camp of the bubbles lower the density, but there's something else going on here. At any rate, in this small-scale test, it's not looking very good for this myth.
A conviction only confirmed after Jamie gets a demo.
So I see you're fixing to dump water all over my floor.
No, I'm containing it in this lovely tank. So what do you think's gonna happen?
I think it's going to sink.
Check this out.
It's not sinking.
Not at all, not even a little bit. If anything, it rises up a fraction of an inch.
You would think that the increased amount of air in the water would make it less dense, so it would sink, but that seems to be counteracted and then some by the upwelling current of that movement of those bubbles.
It's not looking very good for the story at this point.
No.
Far from sinking, the hydrometer rose slightly, but it's too early to call this myth yet. After all, you can't test a swimming saga without getting wet. Next up, a myth that's going to blow you away.
All right, so this myth comes from a viewer. A guy in Iowa wrote in and said that his uncle used to take a bow and arrow, strap a stick of dynamite to it, light it, fire it into a tree, and when it would explode, it would split the tree up the middle.
Okay, are you sure this is a viewer myth and not like a Tori Belleci family history?
No, I'm serious. He wrote it in.
All right, well, I'm willing to try it. Sounds like we need a stick of dynamite, an arrow, and a tree.
As any William Tell fan will tell you, the trick of splitting an apple with an arrow is a blast. But according to this myth, an arrow coupled with dynamite can split a much bigger apple. But is this fan-fabled bow baloney?
Okay, for this experiment, I think we need to just go for it. Get the biggest log we can find and just anchor it to the ground at the bomb range.
But remember, we're trying to split this tree down the middle with explosives. We don't want to just blow it into pieces.
Right. Full-scale testing means finding the right tree.
We're here at the bomb range to find out if our dynamite arrows can split a tree. These are our trees. They are pine trees from a recycler. Now they're 20 feet long and almost 6,000 pounds. So the first step, dig a hole.
The pine trees tech specs match the viewer myth almost to the letter.
All right, how's about right here?
While Carrie gets on with step one,
So much better than a shovel.
getting to grips with the pine's parameters is grand.
Now, we've chosen the pine tree because it's one of the most common trees in America. In fact, there are over 35 varieties in North America alone. But there are two reasons that might make it easier to split down the middle. One, they have vascular bundles that run the entire length of the tree, and these are tiny tubes that carry water and nutrients to the top. And two, it's got a spiral grain, which goes parallel to the axis of the tree. Those things together might just help us get a split.
That's the theory. And with the target tree now standing tall,
Now that's what I call a real stick in the mud.
the guys turn their attention to the weapon, setting up a remote bow and arrow firing mechanism.
So we need to fire a lit stick of dynamite from a bow and arrow into a tree. Now, that is way too dangerous for us to do. So we brought out our remote arrow firing mechanism. This way we can shoot from a distance and we'll be safe. Plus, we're gonna be using a compound bow. That way we get the maximum amount of energy with the least amount of effort.
With the bow ready to go, that just leaves the payload.
We're not going to use dynamite because actually it's a fairly unstable substance. Instead, our experts Frank Doyle and J.D. Nelson have given us this. It's a binary explosive. It's a lot more stable, which means it'll go off when and where we want it to. And it has exactly the same amount of energy as a stick of dynamite.
After a quick test fire to make sure their remote bow and arrow is on the money, it's time to take aim at this myth.
It's time to load up our arrow firing machine, shoot it into the tree, and see if we can split it down the middle.
Do I think that's gonna happen? Sure, absolutely.
If we lived in a cartoon.
Wile E. Coyote Carrie has her doubts, but there's only one way to find out.
All right, so the dynamite's lit. Let's see if we can cleave this tree.
Okay, this is dynamite arrow. Take it.
Here we go. In 3, 2, 1.
The arrow gets triggered, the fuse burns through, and then...
And the tree still stands.
That was a
Tree
good
just laughing at us.
It sure was a hefty blast, but when the smoke clears, it's clear it wasn't hefty enough. The tree appears to be pretty well undamaged.
All right, well, the tree is still in one piece.
Yeah, I don't even see a crack.
Well, maybe we need more explosives. Maybe this was more than just like a stick of dynamite. Maybe it was extra powerful dynamite.
That is a great idea.
After a surprisingly feeble first test, the myth is already on thin ice, so it's time to up the ante.
We're gonna double the amount of explosive that we're attaching to the tip of the arrow. Same as before, we're gonna light the fuse, remote fire it into the tree, and see what happens.
I don't know, man. It's not looking very good for this story. Our hydrometer didn't just not sink in the water, it rose.
Well, you know, sometimes things as basic as air and water just doesn't scale that well. Let's say we bump it up a notch and go larger.
All right. Hey, you know that irrigation tank we use for Whirlpool of Death? What say we fill that full of water and put a bubbler at the bottom of it?
I think we've still got it.
I think we do. Let's do it.
Yep, the small scale wasn't particularly promising.
It's not sinking.
But the myth hasn't sunk just yet. And as Adam won't fit in that tank, the team is upsizing everything, starting with the bubble maker.
So this assembly of aquarium bubblers worked pretty well for this test, but if we're going to do this in a larger scale, I don't want to have to do all the plumbing and you can buy 1,000 of these little aquarium thingies. I need to figure out some more efficient way of creating lots of little bubbles.
And the method is typically Jamie-esque in its practical simplicity. Compressed air pumped into a canvas pillowcase, forcing thousands of tiny bubbles through the fabric.
Oh, that is very cool.
Very cool indeed. With the proof of concept pillowcase bubbling away, Adam's on to the next task.
Well, let's start figuring out how to go full scale with this, because I'm dying to get in the water with this.
If the myth is true, dying could be right. But Jamie doesn't seem too bothered by the prospect.
It's going to be fun.
But before the fun begins, Jamie has to upscale his prototype into a heavy-duty working model.
So all we've done here is welded together a couple of heavy steel frames, and we've sandwiched inside the frames a pillowcase. We're pumping air into that pillowcase, and as it pressurizes, it comes through the weave of the fabric.
That's great.
It makes little bubbles.
But not in the shop, it won't. For that, they're heading for some familiar, queasy scenery.
Brings back memories, don't it?
Not very pleasant ones.
Yep, the last time Adam took a dip in the irrigation tank,
Oh, that's great.
things did not go quite to plan.
I'm done with science for today.
We've done our small-scale tests, and we've learned a thing or two. But if we're going to find out if it's possible to swim in fizzy water, we're going to have to swim in fizzy water. So we've come back out here to Alameda to this 10,000-gallon tank that we installed a few years ago, and we're going to put a larger bubbler in it, and Adam's going to go for a swim. Or not.
Now comes the tricky bit, getting the giant bubbler up and in.
All right, take it on up. So our bubbler is just about ready to be put in place. That's a tight fit. Okay, stop. What happens next is that we hook up the air supply.
Okay, go ahead and give it some air.
Nice. And then we slowly lower it the 20 feet to the bottom of this tank, which is full of reasonably clear but quite cold water. Then I will put on some scuba gear, and then we're pretty much ready to do this test, which I hope happens quickly because this water right now is about 50, 51 degrees.
As plans go, it's pretty straightforward.
I'm above ground, and yet I'm going scuba diving.
Bon voyage.
All right, here we go.
How's the water?
The water is so cold, I got an instant headache. But you know what's really cool in here?
What?
Looking out the portholes.
But before Adam can unhook the bubbler, it needs to be in the right position.
Is that good enough?
I think so. Will you start to lower it very slowly?
Will do.
The aim is to get the bubbler perfectly level, to have an even spread of bubbles at the surface.
Fire up the generator, please. Slowly bring it up to the mark.
As the rig roars into life, a perfect hubbub of bubbles bursts forth.
It's a gorgeous stream of bubbles. Can't wait to get into it.
Okay, well, I'll pull the chain out.
With their fully functioning rig in the right position, what's next?
This test is pretty much the same as our small-scale experiments, except this time we're going to have a human hydrometer, namely Adam. Now, we're going to try and weight him so he's neutrally buoyant, and just his head is floating above the water. And when we turn the air on, if he goes up or down, that'll tell us what's really happening.
It's time to sink or swim. Carrie, Tori, and Brent are testing the myth that a dynamite arrow can split a tree down the middle. But so far, it's got the team well and truly stumped.
Well, the tree is still in one piece.
Yeah, I don't even see a crack.
Today's solution? double the dynamite.
So this is 2 times the explosives that we used on the first test. Let's see if this is enough to split the tree down the middle.
All right, we're lit.
All right, Granty, call it.
Okay, so this is splitting a tree with dynamite, double the explosives. In 3, 2, 1.
Whoa!
Wow. Yeah.
That was a good blast.
Well, I'd say this is looking pretty bad for the myth.
Yeah, I mean, we used twice the amount of explosives as the myth calls for, and still, we did not get any cleaving whatsoever.
Even with 2 sticks of modern dynamite, the tree was left with hardly a scratch, let alone a cleave. And Grant thinks he knows why.
Now, my theory is that the dynamite is outside, and when you explode it, all that energy just gets dissipated away from the tree and not where we actually need it to be focused, which is right on the trunk in order to split it.
And without that focus, the myth, unlike the tree, is looking busted. So what's next?
Well, any more explosives strapped to that arrow, it's gonna mess with the aerodynamics. There's no way it's gonna fly. So why don't we just push an arrow into the tree, put as many explosives on it as JD will allow, and just see if we can get anything.
Now you're talking.
For round 3, the MythBusters are going gangbusters, strapping an arrow with as much dynamite as can be crammed on, but too much for it to actually fly. So how much is too much?
JD says the amount we can use out here is 6 sticks of dynamite. Is that gonna split the tree down the middle? I don't know, but we're gonna get a big bang. I like big bangs.
6 drops of essence of terror, 5 drops of sinister sauce.
With the mother of all explosive arrows prepped and embedded in the tree,
Mega arrow is in place.
the team is taking no chances. They'll hunker in the bunker because this is going to be big.
Fire the hole! Fire the hole! Fire the hole!
This is splitting the tree with dynamite, 6 sticks.
In 3, 2, 1.
That was a good explosion. Let's go see if we split the tree.
I don't think so, man.
But we rattled the bunker.
There's just no timber on the timber. Even with 6 sticks of dynamite, the shockwave barely scratches the surface, let alone causes a cleave. So it's back to the drawing board.
So right now, this myth is looking busted. We used 1 stick of dynamite, 2 sticks of dynamite, finally 6 sticks of dynamite. It was not enough to split a tree up the middle like the myth talks about. But this is MythBusters. We're gonna go deeper and not stop here, and we're gonna figure out, is there a way to use nothing but explosives to split that tree?
In Bubble Trouble, Adam is about to find out if decreasing the density of water with air means you'll sink without a trace. And to do that, Adam's ditched the scuba tank and turned himself into a neutrally buoyant human hydrometer.
My wetsuit makes me quite flotacious. I'm overly buoyant, so I'm putting weights around my waist so that I will be neutrally buoyant, ideally floating right around here. Then we'll be able to see the best effect that the bubbles might have on it.
All right, let's try it.
I think that's perfect.
It's a simple test.
Let's fire up the compressor.
When Jamie turns on the bubbler, if Adam sinks, the myth is looking good.
Okay, open the valve to the mark, please.
Oh, here they come!
With the bubbles on, Adam does go under, but not quite as planned. He first gets pushed to the side, and only then does he sink.
I'll tell you, it's not making me sink like a stone, but it is creating this really strong current that's throwing me to the side, and I feel like dragging me down a little bit.
You don't seem to be able to stay right there.
No, I definitely can't stay on top of this. It's it's a super strong push, and if I
Get pushed to the side, I get dragged under, is what he was going to say. It seems Adam is being lifted up and away from the central column of bubbles. And then, just like a convection current, there's a downward drag at the outer edge.
Where to from here?
Well, I think if we're seeing this kind of effect where it's an upwelling that drags me down on the outside, let's turn it up and see if the effect gets more pronounced.
My kind of thinking.
Of course, it's the one instruction that fits all myth-busting occasions. Lamp it up.
Oh! I'm trying to stay on top of it. Whoa! You wouldn't believe how gentle it looks at the bottom. The bubbles are so small, it's like smoke rising from this gentle platform. And up here, all hell is breaking loose.
Wow.
That's significant. Real
Significant. And as they turn it up again,
Let's move it up another notch.
it only becomes more so. The bigger current pushes Adam to the side faster and then pulls him under further.
You know, when the water was calm, we were like a foot below the surface. Now, it's like 6 inches below the surface. So we have, in fact, increased the volume of the water, which means we've decreased its density. And yet on the bubble stream, I'm not sinking.
That's amazing.
Yep, the increased volume is confirmation that density has decreased, which, according to the myth, should result in Adam sinking.
I'm on top of the bubbles now!
In fact, the upwelling of water associated with the rising bubbles
Whoa! Oh, the current is really strong.
is pushing him upwards until he reaches the sides, leaving just one further test.
We need more power, Scotty.
Jamie just made a Star Trek reference. Awesome!
And with the compressor giving us all she's got,
It's like riding a fucking Bronco.
Jamie and Adam are ready to wrap it up.
Well, I don't feel like we can call it on the basis of this tank. I think it's actually too small. This current being everything, it sort of overwhelms the original story, which is about bubbles. So I feel like we need to create more bubbles in a much bigger space. The myth is that you can't swim in bubbles. There's no swimming going on in there. It's treading. We need to go someplace we can do some swimming.
The close proximity of the tank's walls has rendered the results unreliable. To truly test the myth, they'll need somewhere with much more room to make a splash in.
This was a great test. It was also an excellent proof of concept for my prototype bubble maker. It put things in a human scale and showed us a lot about bubbles and how they interact with water. But given that this myth is about swimming in bubbles, to test it properly, we're going to have to go up yet more in scale.
Now, when you're getting out of a tank this big, the dismount is really important to do it safely. Watch this. Any questions?
After 3 big booms, the myth of a dynamite axe is, well,
100% bust. You're not gonna split a tree using 1 stick of dynamite, let alone 6 sticks of dynamite.
Yeah, all the energy is going outward. It's completely external. I think to actually cleave the tree, you need something inside.
All right, well, what if we tried reconfiguring the explosives? Get it closer to the core. Maybe that will split the tree up the middle.
Yeah, let's go to a smaller scale so we can experiment with different kinds of explosives.
Great idea.
with the MythBusters, the team is going to try to replicate the results. And they're starting by shrinking things down with sapling trees, hoping to get that mythical split.
So we're back at the bomb range with more trees. And this time what we're gonna do is experiment with different types of explosives and different techniques for getting those explosives into the trees. And hopefully, we'll get a split.
Much as they love blowing things up, this myth is about dividing the tree, not destroying it.
That's a fine-looking tree. It's a shame we have to blow it up.
So in small scale, the guys are going to start by putting 2 explosives head-to-head.
The first type is TNT, or trinitrotoluene. Now, this is a faster-moving, more tearing explosive. The other kind of explosive we're going to be using is ANFO. That is a slower-moving explosive, but it has more pushing power. We're going to see if either of those is able to split our tree up the middle, just like the myth.
But switching the explosives and using tiny quantities aren't the only changes they're drilling down for this test.
So what we've done here is solve what I think is the biggest problem of our previous test, which is getting the explosive to where it needs to be, which is the strength of the tree, the core, the heartwood.
But will this internal placement cause the cleave the dynamite arrow couldn't? Well, to find out, they're starting by embedding explosive 1, the TNT.
Smoke. We're good.
All right, this is TNT in the little pine tree.
Woohoo!
Let's do it.
It's a tense wait for the fuse to burn down until... It could have had the boom. But did it give the team the kind of break they need?
I see some cracking going on, but not what I would call a split.
Yeah, it seems like it's shredding more than anything.
Tori's on the money. Traveling at more than 21,000 feet per second, the shockwave from the TNT simply ripped the tree to pieces. Will their low-velocity explosive do any better?
This is ANFO, which stands for ammonium nitrate fuel oil. It's a lower velocity explosive than TNT, which means it has a higher likelihood of actually splitting the tree without shredding it.
Where the TNT ripped and tore, the ANFO should push and split.
Get in there.
And to try and avoid destroying the tree, they're using the smallest amount of explosive that will detonate.
All right, you ready to light the candle?
Ready.
Let's do it.
We've got smoke.
Okay, let's get out. Okay, it's lit.
Cool.
Note to self, when you see a smoking tree, run.
Especially around the MythBusters.
And a burning fuse means you can't know when it's going to blow. With just a cupful of ANFO, the tree toppled. But in the midst of all that carnage, the team can see signs of success from this test.
So what we're seeing with the ANFO is larger splinters, which is more like what we want. But just to remind you here, the idea is to assist the splitting with the explosives, not to annihilate the tree. So I think rather than directing all the energy at a single point at the base, what we need to do is distribute it up along the length of the tree so that when you go boom, it goes like that.
In other words, the team thinks Test 2's explosives were right, but the placement was wrong. So next, they're sticking with ANFO.
If you ever have a chance to cut down a tree with high explosives, I highly recommend it.
But cutting some zipper-like grooves in tree 3.
What I've just done is cut some vertical grooves in the bark of the tree. That way we can lay up our explosives along the grain, the vascular bundles of the tree. Because what's happening right now is we have an explosive at the base and it's cross-cutting. What we want is a vertical split. So this way we put the explosives up the line of the tree and that force punches through and hopefully we get that vertical split that we're looking for. All right, the grooves are loaded. We're going hot. All right, we're lit. You know, JD?
Yes?
I heard cool guys don't look at explosions. They turn around and then they walk away.
Okay, so this is cutting a tree in half with explosives, zipper technique.
It didn't go completely to plan, but at least the team hit slightly more than a toppled trunk. It's kind of a split in the right direction.
Wow,
Check it
that
out.
is definitely a better technique.
Finally, we got a split.
Of sorts. It's still not the clean cleave they wanted, but promising enough to warrant one more go at a mighty grand finale.
What did we do right? Well, on this test, we got our explosive in a line that's parallel to the grain of the tree. Instead of focusing on one spot, we went all the way up the tree, and I think that is what made the difference. Now, this is a small tree, but that's fine. We proved the concept here. Now it's time for us to go into a big tree and try it full scale.
That is awesome. But I mean, this myth is still busted, but I mean, with a little engineering, we got the results we were looking for, a split tree.
Well, I think this is enough for us to find a big tree and move on to full scale.
Oh, wow, this is gonna be crazy.
So far, Bubble Trouble is looking like a bust.
Wow, I feel it totally lifting me.
But Adam and Jamie aren't done yet.
I took a pin in the leg.
To put this myth to bed, they're going to sink or swim in a full-size pool with a super-sized bubbler, one that's 4 feet wide and 16 feet long. And to get the job done in double time, Jamie welds the massive steel frame while Adam sews the giant canvas bubbler bag.
Well, based on what we saw at the big tank, this new bladder ought to be perfect for the swimming pool. You know what it looks like? It looks like the world's largest whoopee cushion.
With both bubbler components ready to roll, the truck gets loaded and locked. And it's off to familiar location.
Please don't start talking like a pirate again.
Okay.
Adam may be able to resist.
Are you excited? Yeah. Got a strong silent type he is.
But we can't.
So the myth is that it is impossible to swim in bubbly water. And so far we've tested that in small scale in a fish tank.
It's not sinking.
And in a 10,000-gallon irrigation tank in what is now only medium scale.
I'm on top of the bubble, Scott!
In both cases, we found evidence of upwelling and currents that really make us feel like we haven't fully answered this question. So now it's time for Mondo scale, full-size swimming pool. Yeah, that's it. We've built a bubbler that will give us a swath of bubbles 4 feet wide and 16 feet long. I'm gonna get in it and see if I can swim. Yeah, we recognize that you have a choice of myths, and we thank you for flying MythBusters. That's nice and stable.
Remember those little fish tank bubblers and then that little bag that I tested out in the shop?
That's not bad.
Well, this is the final result of all that testing, the granddaddy bubbler. We've got I-beams on it to hold it down against the flotation. We've got a massive steel frame, the big bladder, and not one, but 2 air pumps to supply all the air we need. We drop it in the pool, and you got yourself a big-ass bubbler.
It's big, but will it be big enough to eliminate those supposed edge effects? Well, to find out, Adam, designated to do the wet work, goes under to guide it into position and make sure it's level.
It's within 1 or 2 degrees of level, and I'm inclined to start up the pump and see what it looks like.
I'm on it.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead and let some air in.
With the air pump on, things seem to be proceeding smoothly until...
Cut the air.
Luckily, Adam was clear of the rig when it made an unexpected and dangerous break for the surface. And make no mistake, despite the muffled noise and sub-aqua slow motion, that was 1,600 pounds of runaway rogue steel.
Not enough weight?
Not enough weight. The whole thing started to float.
Well, that's a
bummer.
But the solution is simple.
It could simply be a matter of just placing the barbell weights in the corners.
Well, that's why we brought the barbells. I'll start to break them out.
With an additional 100 pounds on each corner, totaling 2,000 pounds, surely they've got this covered. Cue test number 2.
I see little bubbles starting to come up.
And at first, it all seems to be working beautifully. But once again, the astonishing force exerted by the buoyancy of the trapped air is evident.
Stop, cut the air.
And that's another
bummer.
Yeah.
It was looking so good.
It was looking so good, but now the whole rig and...
Yeah.
So far, the team has selected option F for failure. But it takes more than 2,000 pounds of runaway steel to throw the MythBusters off their game.
This is just a minor setback. All we need are heavier I-beams or bars of steel of some sort to put on this thing. We'll be able to weight it down. We'll fix it.
Look, when you want to rescue big things from the bottom of a body of water, you use what are called lift bags, these airtight canvas bags you fill with air, and the air lifts stuff off the bottom. What we've essentially made here is a captured air bladder. And we're trying to keep it on the bottom, which is proving more of a challenge than we surmised.
That's a workout, huh?
Oh. This is where things get dangerous late in the day. Let's test them out.
Yeah. Right in place?
Yeah, I'm gonna stay far away from this rig while you pressurize it.
Their first unsuccessful test of the rig weighed in at 1,600 pounds. This time they've got 4,200. But will this be enough?
There they come. Yeah, baby. So that may have been about halfway.
That's perfect. Nothing's budging. It looks gorgeous.
Excellent. So we had a few bugs to work out. So sue me. We added more weight. It took care of the buoyancy problem, and we're all tested, good to go. I think we're ready for tomorrow.
Now, we've already busted the myth that you can use a dynamite arrow to split a tree in two, but we wanted to find out if you can use explosives to create that perfect cleave. So we did a few experiments. We tried TNT, we tried ANFO. As you can see, it didn't quite work from a singular point. So we went and took it one step further. We made sort of a zipper by perforating the tree with little slots and filling them with ANFO. And we did get a split. So now it's time to take it to full scale. We've come out to the forest to make a tree split MythBusters style.
Doing it MythBusters style means driving to an isolated tree farm.
Man, this is way out there, isn't it?
And blowing the biggest tree they can see with the technique they sort of perfected in small scale.
It's like a winter wonderland out here.
You can't see the trees for the forest.
Here's the tree.
Wow, that is one big tree.
Definitely. This is a 100-foot tall ponderosa pine. Now, you might be a little freaked out that we're using a perfectly good tree in our experiment, but it's already been earmarked for lumber. And it will be recycled at the end of the experiment. Depending on how successful we are, it'll either be lumber, or if we manage to split it, firewood.
Given their early results, splitting this tall tree seems like an even taller order. But Tori, for one, is confident.
Now, we learned from our small scale that ANFO was the best type of explosive. It was slower moving, more pushing. And what we also learned is cutting grooves along the vertical of the tree will give us a better chance of splitting the tree. So we're gonna do just that. We're gonna cut a bunch of grooves up the length of the tree so that way the force of the explosion is vertical and hopefully we can replicate the results.
In other words, going big means thinking small, cutting lots of vertical slots near the core to house small bags of boom. But Tori and heights have never been the best of friends.
Oh, I love heights. Remember last time I was up this high and I fell?
Don't let go.
Oh. Let's hope nothing like that happens.
Add a chainsaw to the mix, it seems like a recipe for disaster.
Ah! We're gonna die! Here we go.
Fortunately, he stays focused enough to cut the zipper-like grooves from top to bottom that may yield the perfect cleave.
All right, so we finished cutting 15 slots up the length of the tree. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna fill those slots with ANFO, ignite them, and see if we can split this tree up the middle.
But first, they need to do a serious calculation of just how much bang they need for their buck.
Okay, now when you usually see explosives enter the MythBusters scene, you're used to seeing mass quantities, like the 850 pounds we used in the cement truck. Now for this experiment, we actually want a pushing rather than a huge destruction. So we're only gonna use about 25 pounds of ANFO in small bags strung evenly up the side of the tree. That way, hopefully we get a nice clean cleave.
It's a delicate operation. Too much ANFO and the tree will be blown apart. Too little and the explosive may not even detonate.
All right, so 1 pound bags.
1 pound bags.
Luckily, bomb expert Frank is on hand to take charge of the charge.
Okay.
What do you think, Frank? Am I gonna be able to join the bomb squad after this?
Hey, we're signing you up right now.
All right, ready to decorate the tree?
Ready to wire in. ANFO?
There you go.
Working somewhat gingerly, Carrie and Grant carefully place the 25 1-pound bags along the entire trunk.
Oh, you know what? The sap is a natural adhesive to holding the bags in. So add wiring explosives at heights to my resume.
All right, you done?
I'm done.
And as the saying goes,
Let's make like a tree and leave.
Going down on this level, we have explosives, timber, and ladies' lingerie. Okay, this is the very last bag of explosives going in the tree. We've wired them all the way up. I think we might actually have a shot at this one. I mean, we've given it all the advantage we possibly could. Using this nice low-velocity explosive, we've given it a perforation so that it could go really, really well. I think we might get a nice clean split.
but the guys, on the other hand, aren't so sure.
So do I think the tree's gonna split? There's a lot of factors that go into it. Too much explosive, too little, the weight of the branches. Given all that, I think we are gonna get a split. Maybe not super clean, but it's gonna split.
Looking at all this ANFO in this tree, I have a feeling we're just gonna blow this tree in a bunch of pieces. Yeah, this looks safe enough here.
All right, I guess we're all set. You guys ready?
Oh, I'm so ready.
Burn the hole! Burn the hole! Okay, so this is splitting a tree with ANFO. Here we go. In 3, 2, 1, fire!
After double trouble with the bubbler,
Cut the air.
Adam and Jamie are ready to test the myth that it's impossible to swim in bubbly water.
Our first test is the control. Without turning the bubbler on, I'm going to swim from here across the pool and back.
And I'll take a reading on the stopwatch.
Once we've got that timing, we're going to turn the bubbler on. I'm going to do the same thing again and see if there's any difference.
And if there's anything to this myth, it should take Adam longer to swim through the bubbles.
Woo! Woo! Have I mentioned this pool is not heated? All right, I'm ready.
Okay, swimming without bubbles. In 3, 2, 1, go.
The neutrally buoyant Frisco torpedo is off to lay down a marker. The theory being that a comparison of lap times in bubbly and non-bubbly water will tell us if there's anything to the myth at all. It may not be impossible, but it could be more difficult.
Stop! Woo!
I got 29.84 seconds. Let's call it an even 30 seconds.
Which means it's time to fire up the generator, blow some bubbles, and see if the torpedo is affected by those millions of tiny pockets of air.
Okay, swimming with bubbles. In 3, 2, 1, go.
On the first lap, displaying all of his exemplary style and technique, Adam powers through the bubbles. But on the way back, it's not so easy. Just like the small-scale tests, the upwelling current pushes into the side and outweighs any effect the lower density may have.
Okay.
32.5 seconds.
That's a lot. That's like 8%.
So where does that leave us?
At this stage, it seems that the myth that it's impossible to swim in bubbly water is pretty much busted. It does, however, seem to be more difficult to swim in bubbly water, and the timings we've been taking from my testing seem to bear that out. So given that there might be a grain of truth to this story, that it might be more difficult, but not impossible to swim in bubbly water, we're gonna ramp it up as far as we can go and see if we can't make that artifact more pronounced.
We've done our testing at 1/4 compressor capacity, and the results were interesting, but perhaps not conclusive. So I think now it's time to ramp it up. That's more like it. And that means we're gonna go full power with those compressors. We'll see what happens.
Wow, that's a lot of bubbles.
You ready?
Ready.
All right, full scale bubble test. In 3, 2, 1, go.
With the dial turned to 11, the forces Adam has to deal with are clearly evident. Despite looking quite serene below, it's a broiling, frothing volcano at the surface, and the current is just too strong to swim across.
Swim harder.
Meaning in this case, it is impossible to swim in.
Like any good myth, this one has a grain of truth at its heart. And that is that when you mix air with water, it is going to make that water less dense. The thing is that by taking it to ridiculous extremes like we have, you're just not trying hard enough. Stop screwing around. That decrease in density relative to its surroundings causes an upwelling and a very vigorous current, in fact. And that current is so vigorous that it makes it virtually impossible to swim through it.
I swallowed some water.
After small scale, medium scale, and full scale, it wasn't until super full scale that they got the result they were looking for. Adam, for one, is buoyant.
This myth is a letter-perfect case for why I love doing this show. We started out with a myth about it being impossible to swim in bubbly water, the conventional wisdom being that bubbles make the water less dense and thus you would sink, when in fact it turns out that The bubbles create this churning upwelling of current as they rise to the surface, and it is the current and not the bubbles that makes it, in fact, impossible to swim in bubbly water. I love being surprised by results like that. Well, that's pretty neat. We had a build that was more difficult than we thought, a surprise ending, and a myth that is, I gotta say, plausible, but not for the reasons we originally thought.
And bubbly water is kind of festive, isn't it?
Yes, yes it is.
Busting the myth of the explosive tree split has been a bit of a misfire. From big-scale failure
The tree is still in one piece.
to some small-scale success.
Wow, that is definitely a better technique.
But now, the moment of truth.
Here we go.
To replicate the results of this myth, it all comes down to this one-shot wonder. One monster pine tree filled with 25 bags of explosives. They're using the smallest amount of ANFO that will still detonate. But will it be small enough?
In 3, 2, 1.
Fire!
That was a good one. Well, the tree's down. Let's go see if it's split.
If there's anything left of it.
Wow!
Well, what's clear is the ANFO detonated. But what is not clear is what happened to the tree.
Wow, there are bits of tree everywhere.
With the smoke gone, it's bad news for the myth. Instead of a split, the tree's been diced into a nice pile of kindling for Bear Grylls.
The result that we were looking for this experiment was 2 pieces. One left, one right, split right down the middle. What we got was 200 pieces. The tree shattered all over the forest. There's bits everywhere. It turns out the ANFO was just too much. Even at the minimum amount to detonate, to sustain that crack all the way to the top.
That's the key. They really did use the smallest amount of low explosives that would detonate, and yet it was still too much for the tree.
Now, if you look at the trunk, it did actually split it. However, it did not split the entire length of the tree like in the myth. Even with giving it the best possible chances by cutting in little grooves and filling it with the ANFO, it still did not split down the middle. Getting it to do that with explosives is very, very difficult.
And that leaves only one conclusion.
All right, no matter how you look at this myth, this one is busted.
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 But at least we have all this firewood and kindling now.
This isn't a split. This is a shatter.
The tree and the myth are both shattered. And let's face it, if this method didn't work, then a dynamite arrow is not even a long shot.
All right, I got some seedlings.
Okay.
The myth might be busted,
Let's do our part.
but at least the team has given something back to the forest.
Sort of the strange MythBusters circle of life.
That is strange.
I think it's a good deal for the forest. I mean, 3 for 1.